My stepsister gave me a phone to steal my $400K savings from my account, but then I flipped everything. My name is Elle Fanning. I'm 29 years old, a senior financial data analyst based in Seattle. I spend most of my days reading between numbers for a fintech platform that helps small businesses track growth patterns. The job isn't glamorous, but it's clean, controlled, and deeply satisfying in ways I didn't fully understand until everything in my personal life spun completely out of control. I didn't grow up rich, or even particularly stable. My parents divorced when I was 12, right before I started high school. My mother and I stayed in Tacoma, while my dad, Peter, moved to Seattle for work and eventually remarried. That's how Elle entered my life, my new stepsister. She was 2 years younger than me, wore designer backpacks in 7th grade, and had a natural talent for making every room hers the second she entered. The first time we met, she scanned me from head to toe, offered a small fake smile, then turned back to her phone. I told myself it didn't matter, that we'd grow into something resembling sisters. But Elle had other plans, even at 12. She had a gift for playing adults against each other. At dinner, she'd be charming, affectionate, always ready with a compliment. When the plates were cleared, she became cold, cutting, strategic. We're not real sisters, she told me once, just two kids thrown into the same house. At the time, I laughed it off. What did it matter we weren't blood? But we were in the same orbit. We shared holidays, birthdays, and more awkward blended family dinners than I could count over the years. I offered olive branches Elle never took. I helped her with school projects when her mom was traveling. I walked her through SAT practice while she texted boys under the table. When she started college in Portland and got overwhelmed with budgeting, I drove down with spreadsheets and stayed up until 2 a.m. explaining loan interest. It was never enough. She always found a way to twist the story. According to Isla, I had it easy. The good grades, the internships, the steady boyfriend, and later, the career. I wasn't fun. I wasn't real. I just knew how to perform stability better than she did. What she never saw was how much of my life I'd built from scratch. I'd worked 2 jobs in college, slept in basements during my unpaid internships, and lived off instant oatmeal for months to stretch rent. When my maternal grandmother Evelyn passed away during my 2nd year in the workforce, I inherited a trust fund she'd set aside quietly since I was born. She'd always believed in savings over splurging, handwritten letters over expensive gifts. The fund wasn't outrageous, but it was enough to change the pace of my life. I used most of it as a down payment for my apartment in West Seattle, invested the rest, and promised myself I'd never tell anyone outside my accountant. That was the plan, at least. But secrets have a way of leaking in families that don't really listen. I should have known Isla would catch on. She saw the upgraded car. She noticed when I stopped saying no to weekend getaways. And one afternoon at a coffee shop, she flat out asked, "What are you sitting on?" Elle, I told her it was none of her business. That was the first time she walked out mid-conversation, not the last. The next few years were a blur of distance and obligation. We'd see each other at family events, exchange stiff hugs, trade safe jokes about weather and traffic. She'd ask me vague questions about my job, laugh when I used industry terms, then pivot the conversation to herself. I tolerated it. For my dad, for peace. But I never forgot the way she looked at me when she thought I wasn't watching, like I owed her something. Then, one Sunday in early spring, everything changed. Isla showed up at my apartment with a bottle of wine and a velvet-wrapped gift box. I hadn't invited her. In fact, We hadn't spoken outside of a group setting in over 4 months. She said she just wanted to stop by, catch up, and maybe finally apologize for being a brat growing up. I didn't trust her, but I opened the door. I always did. She poured the wine, complimented the bookshelf I'd built myself, and asked me how I was really doing. Not work, not finances, me. I almost believed her, until she handed me the phone. A brand new iPhone, still sealed. You've had that cracked thing forever, she said lightly. I got a hookup through a friend. I wanted to do something nice. I held it in my hands, the box still warm. Isla, I said slowly, this is too much. She waved me off. I'm not great with words. Let me do this for you. Okay, I nodded. She smiled. And that was the moment it began. I didn't know it then, but accepting that gift would trigger the single most violating, calculated betrayal I'd ever experienced, and eventually, it would teach me what it really means to win quietly. I didn't activate the phone right away. Something in me hesitated, not because I thought Isla was dangerous, but because the gesture felt misaligned with our history. Isla had never been generous without strings. She had never been thoughtful without reason. That night, after she left, I set the box on my kitchen counter and stared at it through dinner. It wasn't just that it was expensive. It was the fact that she had chosen it for me, wrapped it, delivered it personally, like she had rehearsed how it would look and sound when I accepted it. The packaging was perfect, even down to a handwritten note in silver ink that read, "Maybe we can start over." That line made something twist in my stomach, and I didn't know if it was hope or warning. 2 days later, I gave in. My old phone had a battery that barely lasted a full meeting, and I told myself that maybe, just maybe, Isla was trying to change. Maybe therapy, or age, or some hard lesson had finally cracked through that thick layer of entitlement. I unboxed the phone, transferred my SIM card, and logged into my Apple ID. Everything transferred quickly, too quickly. My photos were already in albums. My email was perfectly synced. My background image had already been set to a photo I posted on Instagram 6 months ago. I frowned, staring at it. It wasn't just well prepared. It was pre-configured by someone who knew my habits. That was the first moment the hairs on my arms stood up. I texted Isla later that night. "Thanks again for the phone. Weird question, how'd you get everything set up so fast?" Her reply came within seconds. LOL. I guessed your passcode. You're still using Grandma Evelyn's birthday, right? She added a winking emoji, followed by, "Don't worry, I didn't read your stuff. Just help speed things up." I stared at the message for a long time. The fact that she guessed my code wasn't the issue. It was the ease with which she admitted it, like she didn't see it as a boundary, like it was a game. Over the next few days, the phone worked fine on the surface. It ran quickly, looked sleek, and felt like an upgrade. But something was off. Apps I rarely used would stay open in the background. My banking app asked for my password more often than it used to. Sometimes I'd pick up the phone and see the screen flicker, like it had been accessed seconds before. I chalked it up to bugs or updates. But late one night, as I set my alarm, I noticed something I couldn't unsee. The FaceTime app had an active background usage log. Despite the fact that I hadn't opened it in over a week, I closed it, rebooted the phone, and lay in bed wide awake, suddenly unsure of what I'd brought into my home. By the following weekend, my instincts were no longer whispers. They were sirens. I started paying closer attention. The microphone would blink for half a second when I wasn't recording anything. Certain messages I typed seemed to autocomplete in ways that suggested someone was watching. I didn't tell anyone, not even Zoe, my best friend. I needed clarity first, facts. I knew enough about security from my job to understand what this could mean, but I didn't have the tools to confirm it. That changed when I attended a local fintech cybersecurity panel and met Noah. Noah had worked with a few startups we partnered with, and we'd spoken once briefly at a networking event. This time, I waited until the panel ended and pulled him aside. I kept it light, vague, but his expression changed when I mentioned the possibility of spyware. He nodded slowly, then said, "Bring the phone. I'll run a few scans. Just in case. Just in case." That was the phrase I clung to as I drove to his office the next day, with my device wrapped in a cloth napkin, like it might bite. The scans didn't take long. Noah didn't say much, but I watched his jaw tighten as the data filled his screen. "Elle," he said carefully, "this isn't standard malware. Someone installed a surveillance package directly onto your OS. It's sophisticated, full keystroke logging, screen mirroring, microphone and camera access, even location tracking. This isn't spyware from an ad. This was built to monitor one specific person." My throat dried out. "Can you tell where it's sending the data?" I asked. He hesitated. "I can tell you it's staying within the Seattle area. It's someone local. But to pinpoint the exact device on the receiving end, I'd need a subpoena." I nodded. That was enough. I left Noah's office shaking, not out of fear, but recognition. I knew who it was. I knew it in my body before my brain could accept it. Elle didn't want a relationship. She wanted access. She wanted control. And now she had it, or thought she did. But what she didn't know was that I had spent my entire career watching patterns, identifying irregularities, and building systems to resist intrusion. This wasn't just a betrayal. It was a challenge. And something inside me had shifted. I wasn't going to report her yet. I wasn't going to scream, cry, or confront. I was going to flip the entire script. Quietly. The next morning, I didn't go to work. I called in and told my team I needed a day for personal matters, which technically wasn't a lie. I sat at my kitchen table for hours, just thinking, not reacting, not crying, just tracing everything backward, replaying every interaction with Elle in my head like a film reel I had never fully watched. Her apology, the fake humility, the phone already set up before she walked in, the casual text where she bragged about guessing my passcode. Every word had a new weight now. I realized then that this wasn't impulse or jealousy. This had been premeditated. It wasn't about wanting to reconnect. It was about proximity, about control. Elle had always been good at performance, but this time I had data. By the afternoon, I started making quiet moves. I bought a brand new laptop with no connection to my personal cloud. I reset all my passwords using a secure generator and activated two-factor authentication through a secondary line Elle didn't know existed. I opened a new bank account at a different credit union across town, transferred the majority of my funds there, and left a small amount in my old account as bait. Then I changed the display name of the new account to closely match the old one, just one letter off. It looked almost identical on mobile view, especially to someone watching via remote screen capture. That was the beginning of the decoy. Noah helped me monitor the old phone silently. He created a stealth system that tracked all outbound data from it without disrupting the spyware. It wasn't exactly legal, but he told me the real violation had already happened and that gathering proof was better than guessing. Within hours, we saw pings, keystrokes, screenshots, location pings. Session logs from my financial apps. The spyware was active, persistent, and deeply invasive. Whoever was watching thought they were winning. I felt my stomach tighten, but I didn't flinch. I let the performance continue. Over the next few days, I played my part. I left my banking app open on the compromised phone while typing in fake transfers. I made dummy texts to a non-existent financial advisor named Morgan, discussing consolidating all my savings. I made sure my screen stayed lit long enough for someone on the other end to screen grab the balance. I dropped verbal hints on phone calls about being swamped at work and thinking of going offline for a few days. Isla, meanwhile, began texting more frequently. She asked if I wanted to grab dinner next week, if I was still using that old bank app with the clunky UI, if I ever worried about being hacked. Each question sounded innocent. Each one confirmed everything I suspected. That Friday, I staged the next move. I told Isla over text that I was heading to a digital detox retreat in Oregon. No signal, no Wi-Fi, just trails, books, and overpriced smoothies. I posted a few fake travel photos using a side app and even left a packed duffel bag in my entryway in case she dropped by. Then, without fanfare, I checked into a modest boutique hotel 10 minutes from my apartment. Noah set up a real-time monitoring alert. If any large transfer was attempted from the decoy account, I'd get pinged within seconds. I didn't sleep much that weekend. Every time my phone buzzed, I half expected it to be my bank calling to tell me the funds were gone, but the alert didn't come. Not until Monday. At 2:31 a.m., a transfer request had been initiated for nearly all the money in the decoy account. The request failed due to security thresholds Noah and I had put in place. But then came the second transfer, smaller, just under the daily limit. That one went through. I sat in bed watching the logs refresh. There it was. My decoy account was now short by exactly $25,000. The receiving account matched one I had flagged earlier. A digital-first bank known for being used by shell accounts and intermediaries. Isla had taken the bait. She had made her move. The final piece I needed now was confrontation, not anger, not vengeance, just confirmation. I sent her a simple message from a new number that morning. Emergency. Need to talk in person. Meet me in an hour. No texts. Her reply came within minutes. What's going on? Are you okay? I didn't answer. I wanted her unsure. I wanted her to walk into that apartment thinking she was still ahead, that I was calling her in a panic, that I had no idea what had just happened. She knocked 15 minutes early, looking disheveled but alert. I opened the door slowly, meeting her eyes without smiling. Come in, I said, my voice flat. We need to talk about the transfer. Her body went stiff. She blinked. What transfer? I didn't reply. I just stepped aside and watched her hesitate before walking in. She looked at the old phone still charging on the kitchen counter and then back at me. I thought you were out of town, she said quietly. I thought you needed a break. I did, I said, locking the door behind her. But I figured you needed one too, from pretending. Isla walked in slowly, scanning the apartment like she didn't recognize it anymore. Maybe it was the silence. Maybe it was the way I didn't offer tea or wine or anything that could make this feel like a social visit. She stood near the kitchen island, one hand gripping the strap of her oversized bag, the other brushing invisible dust from her sleeve. Her voice, when it came, was cautious but polished. I'm not sure what this is about. Elle, but you sounded upset. Is everything okay? I didn't answer right away. I walked over to the table where my laptop sat, clicked a few keys, and let the screen light up. Isla leaned forward slightly, pretending to look curious instead of nervous. I turned the screen toward her and watched her face. On it was a transaction log from my decoy account, showing a transfer of $25,000 to a masked recipient bank. I didn't say a word. I just watched her pupils flick left and right, calculating. She straightened up and gave a dry laugh. You think I had something to do with that? Her voice was higher than usual, overly casual, like she was performing confidence instead of living in it. I leaned against the table, arms crossed. The spyware on that phone, I said, pointing to the device still resting by the outlet, was transmitting my banking credentials. You installed it before you gave it to me, and you used that access to try and take everything. Her mouth twitched, then hardened. You sound paranoid, she said flatly, but her shoulders betrayed her. They were no longer squared. If you think your phone was hacked, go to the police. I nodded slowly. Already did, but I wanted to give you a chance to say it to my face first. The silence stretched between us like a wire pulled tight. She shifted her weight from one foot to the other, the facade starting to buckle. So you set me up, she muttered. That's what this is, a trap. No, I replied, my voice calm. You set yourself up. I just stopped pretending not to see it. Her face changed then. The mask slipped. Anger flared, raw and hot. You always thought you were better than me, she snapped. Perfect Elle. Smart Elle. The one Grandma actually cared about. Her voice cracked around the word grandma, like saying it cost her something. You got everything. She hissed. The apartment, the job, the money, the approval. You think I wanted to steal from you? You left me no choice. I blinked slowly. You had a choice. Every single time I helped you, you had a choice. You chose to lie, again and again. She paced now, ranting, her words spilling out faster than she could manage them. She said I hoarded opportunities, that I didn't share my luck, that she had been scraping by while I sipped cocktails on rooftops, that even when I did help, I made her feel small. I let her talk. I let it pour out of her like water from a cracked dam, all the resentment and delusion she'd stored for years. I waited until she ran out of steam, until her voice dropped to a whisper and her eyes searched mine for softness, for anything that would signal I still cared enough to forgive. I didn't flinch. I didn't owe you a cent. I said, I gave because I wanted to believe we could be something more than two girls forced into the same house. I wanted to believe you had good in you, that maybe someday you'd see me as a person instead of a competitor. But what you did was calculated. You didn't ask for help. You invaded my privacy. You tried to steal my life's work. She sat down heavily, her back to the wall, the energy drained from her. It was just money, she said weakly. You would have recovered. I exhaled sharply. It wasn't the money. It was what it represented. It was safety, boundaries, effort. The years I spent building something stable after growing up in a house where nothing was. Her eyes dropped to the floor. She didn't argue anymore. I walked over and placed a small envelope beside her. Inside were screenshots, timestamps, even an audio glitch from the spyware that accidentally recorded her voice during a fake banking conversation. She didn't open it. She didn't need to. You're not pressing charges, she said finally, more confused than relieved. Not yet, I replied, but I've filed a preliminary report and handed everything to my attorney. Whether this becomes criminal or civil depends on what you do next. Her head jerked up. So what? You're giving me a chance. I nodded, not because you deserve it, because I need to know I did everything in my power to close this without revenge. The look on her face was unreadable, a mix of shame, disbelief, and something like respect, though it faded quickly. "You really think you're better than me," she said again, but softer this time. "No," I replied. "I just finally believe I'm worth protecting." The weight of that sentence lingered in the room long after she left. For once, I wasn't left holding the mess. I had simply drawn the line, and that changed everything. After Isla left that night, I didn't sleep. I sat on the couch in silence, staring at the closed door like it could still breathe. The apartment felt colder than usual, not because the temperature had dropped, but because something permanent had been removed from the room. There was no yelling, no dramatic exit, no smashed glass or threats of revenge, just a quiet collapse. And somehow, that made it feel even heavier. It was the kind of silence that comes after an earthquake, where everything looks intact until you inspect the cracks. The next morning, I emailed my attorney and submitted the full timeline of what had happened, from the spyware to the stage transfer and the confrontation. I attached logs, audio files, screen captures, and the certified documentation Noah had prepared. I told them I wasn't pressing formal charges yet, but I wanted the file active in case I needed to escalate. They agreed, cautiously supportive, reminding me to keep my distance and record everything moving forward. I already had. I was done letting things slip through the cracks. By noon, my phone lit up with calls. My father, then Susan, then Isla again. I didn't pick up. I needed time to process, to grieve in a way that made sense only to me, because that's what betrayal is. It isn't just a single moment of impact. It's the erosion of trust over time that finally collapses in silence. I kept thinking back to all the versions of Isla I had chosen to believe. The little girl who asked to borrow my books, the teenager who cried when her mother missed her choir recital, the woman who swore she was trying. None of those versions were fake, but none of them were enough to justify what she had done. That evening, my father showed up unannounced. I didn't buzz him in. He waited outside for 15 minutes before texting. "Please, I just want to understand." I let him in, but I didn't say much. He walked in with tired eyes and a stiffness that told me he already knew most of the story. Isla had confessed something, though I didn't know how much. He stood in the middle of my living room, looking around like he was seeing it for the first time. "She's not well," he said finally. "That much is clear." I nodded. He waited for me to add something, but I didn't. "I want to believe," he continued slowly, "that what she did wasn't malicious, that it was desperation, or poor judgment, or some kind of cry for help." I looked at him then, really looked, and saw the man who had always tried to keep peace by avoiding hard truths. I said nothing. He sat down without being invited. "She told Susan it was all a misunderstanding," he said, "that you were paranoid, that the money wasn't real, that you staged the whole thing to humiliate her." I let out a breath that was half a laugh. "And did you believe her?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. "I wanted to," he admitted, "but I've seen the way she treats you. I've seen how much you've done for her. I just didn't want to admit what it meant." His voice cracked slightly, and for the first time, I saw the shame he carried, not because of what Isla did, but because of how long he let it go unchecked. "You always seemed fine," he added quietly. "You never made a fuss. You never asked for anything." I looked at him carefully. That's not the same as being okay. He nodded slowly, rubbing his face like he was trying to wipe the guilt off it. What do you want me to do? He asked. The question sat between us for a long moment. I didn't know how to answer it. I wasn't looking for justice from him. Not anymore. Nothing. I said eventually, this isn't about punishment. It's about boundaries. And I'm done explaining mine. He looked like he wanted to say more, but chose not to. He left after a few minutes, quiet and heavy, like he understood he couldn't fix this one. That week, I changed apartments, not because I was scared, but because I needed to feel new air, new walls, new distance from everything Isla had touched. I found a place closer to Lake Union, with fewer memories and more light. I repainted the walls, replaced the furniture, and threw away anything that reminded me of our shared history. It wasn't an act of erasure. It was survival. Some wounds don't scar immediately. They throb quietly until you realize they've shaped the way you breathe. Zoe helped me move. She didn't ask questions, just showed up with takeout and her usual dry humor. When I finally told her the full story, she didn't say, I told you so. She said, you didn't deserve that, none of it. And I realized in that moment that healing starts in the people who don't demand your pain make sense. Noah checked in too, just to make sure the spyware hadn't replicated or moved to other devices. It hadn't. He cleared everything, wiped every trace, and left me with a new phone that hadn't touched Isla's orbit. Before he left, he paused in the doorway and said, you kept your cool in a situation where most people would have burned everything down. That's not weakness. That's discipline. I didn't say anything, but I felt the truth of it settle in my chest. Quiet strength has no audience, but it always knows who it is. Moving into the new apartment gave me a strange kind of stillness. It wasn't joy, or closure, or relief. It was something colder, something quieter, like standing in an unfamiliar room and realizing no one knows where you are. I unpacked each box methodically, like I was rebuilding not just a home, but a version of myself that didn't feel so easily accessed, so easily overwritten. The furniture was simpler, the color palette softer. There were no souvenirs from family holidays, no birthday cards I didn't have the heart to throw away. It was all neutral space. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe without looking over my shoulder. Work was the only part of my life that didn't feel altered. My job in financial data analysis had always been clinical by nature: spreadsheets, trends, risk profiles. But now, even those numbers carried a different weight. I started noticing the way we flagged suspicious transactions and thought of Isla. I started thinking about how many people had their financial lives dismantled not by hackers in foreign countries, but by people who knew them personally, who smiled at the same tables and asked about their day. So I started researching, quietly, at night. After my meetings ended and my inbox had gone still, I read studies about financial abuse, about fraud within families, about the silent patterns that often went unnoticed because they weren't dramatic enough to report. It turned out that what Isla had done, while uncommon in form, was painfully familiar in structure. Exploit trust, gain access, use guilt as cover, repeat. I didn't feel vindicated reading those case studies. I felt connected, like my experience wasn't an outlier, just another variation in a pattern no one wanted to name out loud. Noah and I kept in touch, mostly through text at first. He'd send links to articles he thought I'd appreciate. I'd ask the occasional security question, pretending I needed help with something technical. We both knew it was about more than spyware at that point, but neither of us said it. It wasn't until he invited me to a small panel he was speaking on about ethical tech and digital boundaries that something shifted. I went, sat in the back, and watched him explain how privacy isn't just a technical issue. It's an emotional one. It's about trust, consent, and the right to define what parts of yourself others are allowed to access. Afterward, he found me in the lobby. We stood near the coffee station for 10 minutes without touching the cups. When he asked how I'd been, I didn't say fine. I said I was building again. And somehow, he understood what that meant. We started meeting for lunch occasionally, then dinner, then weekends that didn't involve conference badges or firewalls. There was no whirlwind, just consistency, kindness, presence. He never asked about Isla unless I brought it up, and when I did, he listened without trying to fix it. That, more than anything, helped me feel human again. Meanwhile, I had quietly submitted a proposal to my company, a small idea, at first a module for detecting behavioral patterns that might indicate internal financial abuse. Most of the leadership team ignored it, but one director flagged it as worth pursuing. So I kept pushing. I used my own experience, anonymized, to illustrate the potential. The tool wasn't revolutionary, but it started conversations about trust, about access, about how we train our systems to detect anomalies in code, but not in people. It felt like stitching something torn, not back to what it was, but into something functional again. Around the same time, I received a letter, handwritten, no return address, but I recognized the handwriting immediately. Isla. My stomach tightened before I even opened it. Inside was a folded sheet of thick paper, neat and contained, no perfume, no dramatics, just a note. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve that. I just want you to know I see it now. What I did, what it cost you, what it cost me. And I'm sorry. I read it 3 times. Not because I was emotional, because I didn't know what to feel. There was no manipulation in the tone, no excuses, just acknowledgement. I put it in a drawer and didn't reply. Weeks later, I got a call from a legal advocate working with a restorative justice program. Isla had entered voluntary counseling. She'd listed me as someone she wished to offer formal amends to. They asked if I'd be willing to consider a structured conversation, mediated, with clear boundaries. I didn't say yes, but I didn't say no. I asked for time. That night, I went for a walk along the water near Gasworks Park. The city lights rippled across the surface, and for the first time in a while, I felt the weight of my own story resting in my chest, like something I was finally strong enough to carry. I didn't know if I'd ever trust Isla again. I didn't know if reconciliation was something I even wanted. But I did know this. I was no longer afraid of her shadow. The decision didn't come with a moment of clarity or a swell of emotion. It came quietly. In the middle of a Tuesday afternoon, while I was making tea, I opened the drawer, saw the letter again, and instead of closing it like I usually did, I took it out, reread it, and said softly to no one, I'll go, not for Isla, not even for closure, but for myself, to sit in a room without flinching, to prove that I could hear her without losing myself again. The session was scheduled for the following week at a neutral space used by the city's Restorative Justice Network, a former library turned community center. The room was small and warm, with high ceilings and tall windows that let the light in even on overcast days. The mediator, a woman named Adrian, had a calmness that didn't ask for trust but created space for it. She outlined the rules clearly. No interruptions, No crosstalk, no relitigation, just one person speaking, then the other. Truth, accountability, not apology for the sake of comfort. I arrived 10 minutes early, sat with my back to the window, and tried not to count the seconds. When Isla entered, I didn't stand, I didn't smile, I just looked at her, and she looked back. No makeup, no designer scarf, just a plain navy sweater and a quiet face I hadn't seen in years. She nodded once, as if asking for permission to sit, then did. Adrienne welcomed us both, set the timer, and gave Isla the floor. She didn't read from a paper, she didn't pause for drama, she just spoke. She said the words I'd never heard growing up. I was angry at you. I envied you. I felt like you were the version of me my mother wished she had. And I hated that you were kind to me even when I didn't deserve it. She didn't excuse what she did. She described it in detail. She admitted to working with someone she was dating at the time, someone she never introduced to the family, someone who encouraged her to go further than she originally planned. She said she'd spent so long resenting me for being secure that when she saw an opportunity to shatter it, she took it without thinking about the consequences. I listened to every word, not because I wanted to forgive, but because I needed the story to be whole. I needed to hear what lived in the silences between us all those years. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't hold back. I told her about the moment I realized the phone wasn't just a gift. I described the way it felt to not sleep for a week, checking my account balance every hour, waiting to see if my life had been hollowed out. I told her that it wasn't the money that broke something in me. It was the calculation, the intimacy of the betrayal, the way she used our shared history as her entry point. I didn't cry, neither did she, but there were moments when I felt something shift in the space between us, like a rope that had gone taut for too long finally beginning to loosen. At the end of the session, there was no hug, no handshake, just a stillness that didn't ache anymore. I stood first. I thanked Adrienne. I nodded to Isla without smiling, and then I left. In the days that followed, I noticed the way my body reacted differently to things. I slept more soundly. I stopped rehearsing conversations in my head that would never happen. I made coffee without checking my phone twice. Trust, it turned out, wasn't about other people. It was about learning to trust my own boundaries again, to believe I would protect myself, no matter who tried to cross the line. That weekend, I met Noah at a quiet spot on the west side of the lake. We talked about work, about the new project I was helping design around financial trauma recovery, and about whether people ever really change. I told him I wasn't sure, but I knew for certain that I had, and sometimes that was enough. Later that evening, I received one final message from Isla, just a single line. I don't expect anything more, but thank you for letting me sit across from you and feel it. I didn't reply, not because I was angry, but because there was nothing left to say. Some stories don't end with reconciliation. Some just end with the truth finally spoken out loud. Months passed quietly after the session. There were no dramatic returns, no second letters, no awkward run-ins at family functions. Isla kept her distance, and for once, silence felt like progress. I didn't miss the tension. I didn't crave updates. I had spent too long assigning weight to her presence in my life, hoping that someday it might add up to something meaningful. But meaning, I realized, doesn't come from other people's behavior. It comes from what you do with what they leave behind. At work, I found myself drawn to problems no one else wanted to touch: legacy code, failed audits, broken back-end systems that required patience and endurance. I understood those things in a new way now. not because I was a better engineer, but because I had lived through a version of it in my own life. I knew what it meant to rebuild something quietly, without applause, without anyone really noticing until the system worked better than before. I used that mindset to refine the prototype I'd pitched months ago, a behavioral risk detection tool designed to identify anomalies in access behavior across shared financial accounts. It wasn't a flashy product, but it was smart, intentional, and shaped by a kind of insight you couldn't pull from textbooks. When the demo went live internally, a few team members asked why I'd chosen to focus on this niche. I didn't offer the full story. I just said that not all fraud comes from strangers, and sometimes the smallest changes in data tell you everything about what's about to break. They nodded, and they listened, more than I expected them to. Around that time, I began volunteering once a week with a local nonprofit that supported victims of coercive control and financial abuse. I didn't share my name or my story. I just helped design their intake systems, digitize their records, and set up secure data channels for families in transition. I met women who had to leave everything behind because their partners had drained their bank accounts. I met teenagers who didn't know their college savings had been spent by someone they trusted. I heard quiet. Patient voices described the moment they realized they'd been betrayed, not by a mistake, but by intention. And I recognized myself in every one of them, not because we had the same stories, but because we had survived something built to make us question what we were worth. Noah knew most of it by then. He never pushed for details, but over time, he became the person I debriefed with after long days and harder nights. He had a way of making space feel safer without needing to fill it. Our relationship wasn't built on romantic highs or constant validation. It was steadier than that, more grounded. We never officially labeled it. We just kept showing up, every time, with the same quiet reliability, the same willingness to listen without judgment. I didn't need to be saved. I just needed someone who understood how long healing can take when the pain comes from family. My relationship with my father remained complicated. We spoke occasionally, usually brief updates about work or logistics around holidays. He was still with Susan, still trying to find the right tone between defending Isla and pretending nothing had happened. I didn't fight him on it. I didn't bring up the past. I just made it clear where my lines were. I wouldn't attend events where Isla was present. I wouldn't be pressured into forgiveness just to keep the peace. And most importantly, I wouldn't shrink anymore so someone else could take up all the space. He didn't argue. He just nodded and said, "I understand." Whether he really did, I'll never know. But I appreciated that. This time, he didn't try to change my mind. In the spring, I was invited to speak at a small tech symposium about ethics in financial software. I almost declined. Public speaking had never been my strength, but Zoe convinced me to do it. Just tell the truth. She said, people remember truth, even when they don't know the story behind it. So I stood on that stage in front of 70 strangers and talked about invisible harm. I talked about how systems should be built not just to prevent theft, but to restore trust. I talked about quiet failures in code that mirrored the ones we ignore in our own lives. And I ended with one line that wasn't planned, but came out as if it had been waiting in my chest for months. The people who underestimate us never realize we're already rebuilding before they think to look down. The applause wasn't loud, but it was sincere, and for the first time in a very long time, I didn't feel like I was speaking from a place of pain. I was speaking from experience, from a path that had led somewhere deeper, clearer, and undeniably my own. The following season felt different, not because anything dramatic changed, but because I finally stopped waiting for the next rupture. There was no crisis to manage, no damage to contain, no reputation to protect from whispers that never really mattered. I still worked with numbers, but the work had meaning again. It wasn't just about tracking efficiency or forecasting revenue. It was about designing systems that understood people, especially the parts of them that didn't always show up on a chart. It was about teaching machines to notice what families sometimes ignore. The proposal I had submitted months ago became a funded project. Our product team began shaping the framework into a tool that could identify early signs of coercion through behavioral finance patterns. Not just obvious fraud, but subtle shifts in control. One account holder logging in significantly more often than the other. Transaction categories changing overnight. Sudden movement of shared assets after conflict patterns. It wouldn't solve everything, but it was a start. And for some users, it might be the warning they didn't know they needed, the kind I never had. When the internal review team asked how I came up with the idea, I gave them a version of the truth. I said that sometimes. People are betrayed by the ones who sit closest to them. That trust is easiest to abuse when it looks like love, and that recovery starts with seeing it clearly, even if you don't call it what it is yet. They didn't ask more questions after that. They just approved the next round of development. Outside of work, I stayed quiet. I wasn't interested in reclaiming old spaces or rebuilding broken ties. I chose stillness over performance. I said no to gatherings that made me shrink. I said yes to solo drives and early mornings and long walks through neighborhoods where no one knew my name. I stopped apologizing for the distance I needed, and I stopped explaining boundaries to people who only heard them as rejection. Healing isn't loud, it's consistent, it's ordinary, and eventually it becomes part of who you are without you realizing it. Noah and I took things slow. That had always been the unspoken rule between us. We didn't define what we were doing. We just kept showing up. It wasn't dramatic or romantic in the way people like to script in films. It was steadier than that. He remembered details. He listened for meaning. He didn't try to fix what hurt. He just never added to it. One night in April, as we walked home from a late dinner, he asked if I still thought about the money, whether I ever regretted not pressing charges. I said no. I said the real theft had never been about the account. It had been about access. And the moment I took that access back, I got everything that actually mattered. Later that month, I met with a small advisory board for a nonprofit that supported women navigating post-divorce financial reconstruction. They had reached out after hearing about my work, asking if I'd help them build a digital budgeting platform that offered both education and emotional literacy. I didn't hesitate. It was the kind of project I would have dismissed years ago as too soft, but now I saw how structure could be a form of care, how stability wasn't just about income, but about clarity, language, and tools. We didn't need to save people. We just needed to stop pretending they were fine when they weren't. At one point during the planning session, someone asked if I had ever dealt with anything similar. Personally, there was a pause. Then I said yes, and I told them only what they needed to know, that someone had tried to steal from me, that it started with a gift, that I had to learn the hard way, how much quieter betrayal becomes when it's dressed like reconciliation. No one pressed for details. They just nodded, like they'd heard different versions of the same story too many times already. 1 year after I confronted Elle, I stood in front of a small audience at the pilot launch of our new feature integration. It wasn't a huge event, No press, just team members, community leaders, and a few survivors who had volunteered their insights during development. At the end of my short presentation, someone asked what we hoped this tool would do. I paused for a moment, then answered honestly. Sometimes, we don't need a system to scream. We just need it to whisper when something's off, when someone's being erased quietly, transaction by transaction, until they don't recognize their own account anymore. If we can catch that whisper early, we might stop it from becoming a crisis. The applause was quiet but firm. Afterward, a woman approached me with tears in her eyes. She didn't say much, just, "I wish I had this 5 years ago." I nodded, because I understood. I wished I had it too. But I also knew that the thing we built came from the thing I survived. And somehow, that felt like the truest kind of return. I never heard from Elle again, not after that final phone call, not even a passing text. For someone who used to flood my inbox with heart emojis and fake apologies, her silence was louder than any confession, and I didn't chase it. There was nothing left to explain, nothing left to recover. The account was closed. Not just the financial one, the emotional one too. By the time summer rolled around, I had already transferred most of my routines into something new. My passwords were different. My name was off anything joint. I had even moved to a smaller apartment, just mine this time. Nothing borrowed. Nothing shared out of guilt. It wasn't glamorous, but it was clean, quiet, and fully paid for with money I protected on my own. Sometimes, when I stood in the kitchen early in the morning, I'd catch myself expecting chaos, expecting a knock on the door or a confrontation or some dramatic twist like you see in cheap films. But nothing came, just sunlight on the counter, just the sound of my own breath and the kettle warming up. It took me months to realize that peace wasn't loud. It was the absence of fear, the absence of checking over your shoulder to see if someone's moved your things again. People often ask if I regret not reporting her, not pressing charges, not going public, but justice doesn't always look like a courtroom or a headline. Sometimes, justice is a slow, quiet reclamation. Sometimes it's simply making sure no one ever gets to rewrite your life again without your consent. I didn't need her behind bars. I needed her out of my house, out of my finances, out of my story, and she was. What surprised me most was how many women I met who had their own Isla, maybe not a stepsister, maybe not a bank account, but the same pattern, the same betrayal disguised as intimacy, a roommate who rewrote mail, a cousin who maxed out a joint credit card, a mother who used her child's name to lease a car. We all carried pieces of the same story, and none of us saw it coming until it was too late. There was something oddly comforting about that, like maybe we weren't the problem after all. Maybe we were just raised to overlook warning signs that should have been taken seriously. I started journaling again, not the performative kind with gold pens and Instagram quotes, but the real kind, late at night, with shaky handwriting and half sentences. I didn't always know what I was writing until I read it back. Pages about money and trust, and what it felt like to hand someone your future in the form of a PIN number. Pages about silence, about the way people change when you finally say no. I kept them for myself. I didn't need validation. I just needed a record that I survived something most people didn't even recognize as harm. And then, one ordinary Wednesday, something strange happened. My old HR director called, asking if I'd consider consulting for a leadership seminar they were planning, not on technical skills, on emotional risk management, apparently. Someone had forwarded her an internal article I ghost wrote about psychological safety in teams. She liked the way I framed harm subtle, systemic, but recoverable. She said it was the kind of insight people needed more of. I smiled when I hung up the phone, not because I needed the work, but because I realized something. My voice was no longer a reaction to what someone did to me. It was a contribution, a form of authorship. That was the win. Not a clapback, not a dramatic confrontation, just presence, just consistency, just showing up, over and over, without asking for applause. My story didn't end with her apology. It didn't even begin with her betrayal. It started the day I realized I didn't need anyone else to validate what I already knew, that I was never weak for being trusting, that I was never stupid for wanting connection, that I had the right to rebuild, quietly, on my own terms. I won't pretend I'm healed completely. Some days, I still hesitate when someone offers to help, wondering what it might cost later, but that's okay. Healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means moving forward with more information, more discernment, more self-respect. I trust myself now in a way I never used to, and I protect that trust the way I once protected other people's comfort. That's the shift. If you've ever been betrayed by someone who smiled while doing it, know this: you don't owe them a second chance just because they cry or claim they were desperate. You don't owe the world a dramatic revenge arc just to prove you're strong. Sometimes. The best revenge is simply building a life where their name never comes up again, where your success is quiet, steady, and fully yours, where peace is the only sound left, and that's exactly what I did.